Good afternoon, everyone. This is Tulio Siragusa with Dojo Live. Welcome to another show. Today is Wednesday, June 10th, 2020. I have today a number of co-hosts joining me to have a good conversation with our very special guest. Joining me today is Annabelle Montiel from Hermosillo, Mexico, and Paula Trujillo from Hermosillo, Mexico. And we also have my co-host, Carlos Ponce, outside of Mexico City. And our guest today is my fellow co-founder, Radical, Jose Leal, or as they say in Portugal, Jose Leal. Welcome, Jose, to the show. It's great to have you here. Let's get started by introducing yourself. Please tell the audience who you are. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, like you said, Jose Leal. So I was born in Portugal, Azores, Portugal, immigrated to the United States when I was young, and always been an entrepreneur. So started my first business when I was 16 years old. At the age of 22, I started my second business, a drafting consultancy business in in Canada, in Toronto, Canada. That led me to the computer field. That led me to the internet in 1995, where I founded Autonet.ca, my first internet company, and that got me into the corporate world. And in the corporate world, I soon realized that all the stuff that I didn't like about people in the corporate world, I was becoming. Took no time at all for me to realize that it was not so much who you are when you're in an environment, but what that environment is and what it does to you. So after about 10 years, I quit. I decided that that was not the space for me. I'd become someone I didn't want to be, and changed my life. I changed my life by leaving the industry for some time. I actually got divorced at the time, moved countries, moved back to the United States, and have been doing a lot of research in the psychology and neuroscience space.
Some people would call that you had a woke moment. So let's talk about that. How does that tie into Radical? Tell us about Radical.
Yeah, it wasn't really an awoke moment, as I would say. It was more like an awoke 5 years. It took that long to come out of that nightmare that my life was. I think we like to say in Radical that we're in a box, and I was very much in that box, both how I viewed the world and how I viewed myself. And through the work that I did in understanding myself and how we as human beings are interdependent in one another and interdependent with nature, I realized really that it is how we work that changes us and causes us to believe the things we do. And in changing us so much, we actually limit our ability to be happy, to be fulfilled, and we limit our ability to be productive. And so through that realization, I came in contact with a number of people in the future of work space. And through those contacts and those relationships, I realized that we had a lot to talk about. And that's when we started Radical. Radical is a movement around how we can understand ourselves better and understand the work that needs to be done in changing our structures and our organizations.
Well, it sounds very interesting. I'm looking forward to chatting some more. Iris, welcome to the show. We have another guest on the show today. You're surrounded by a lot of interesting practitioners of freedom at work. So let's go right into the topic of conversation today. You've chosen radical interdependence at work. And one of the questions you pose is, what would life and work be like if we lived a life of radical purpose? Tell us a little bit about your topic and why you've posed this question.
Well, first of all, interdependence. We all hear about that primarily from a spiritual perspective, right? We all say we're all interdependent and we're all interconnected and so forth. But what we don't realize is how truly interdependent we are. We're interdependent at two levels. First of all, everything that makes our body is something that came from nature. There is no us without nature. And so that interdependence is critical for us to understand that. As we destroy nature, we destroy ourselves. The second is we are totally interdependent as human beings on each other. And that interdependence seems sort of rather subtle, but imagine the idea of a baby without a mother or a father. Won't live very long, right? We need each other. We need each other from birth to death. Throughout that time in our lives, that journey of our lives, we need each other because it is how we were evolved. Our evolvement requires that we see each other and depend on each other in order to be able to live our lives. So that's really about the interdependence component. The other component is that interdependence has these innate needs that we have evolved, and things like meaning, belonging, becoming, impacting, these things are fundamentally innate in us. We need them. And we don't need them intellectually. We need them at a really neurological level, if you will, right? And so it is these things that we call radical purpose. Radical purpose is about understanding that what drives our motivations are things that are meaningful to us. What drives our relationships are people who we feel we want to belong with, and so forth. And so this process of living a radical purpose isn't setting a goal of saying, there's a radical purpose out there and I'm going to go seek that purpose, but instead to recognize and be aware of the fact that we already have that guidance system built in us. Our radical purpose is the thing that we need to be aware of, rather than something that we set a goal for.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, Jose, I would have to agree with you about how sometimes the work environment does change us. I love the analogy of symbiotic with nature, right? Nature is always serving, right? The sun's always shining, there's always water, the earth is always giving. It's in a constant state of giving. So it's interesting how it just gives constantly to each other. Nothing ever gets tired, right? It continuously does that. And yet in the work world, most companies are not set up that way. It's set up very codependent, where there's some people serving and there's some people being served. And unfortunately that creates a disparity and a sense of disconnection, and definitely doesn't create a sense of belonging. So appreciate the comments there. Want to open it up to, I'm sure Annabelle, Paula, and Iris are dying to ask some questions. But please go ahead, guys, ask your questions for Jose. I just wanted to make that comment that I really appreciate the connection between being similar to nature and how we should operate, even at work.
Yes,
go ahead, guys.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Jose. Well, here at NearSoft, we are very related to finding our purpose and meaningful life. And we have created this 4-step career model, and to find our purpose and then connect our purpose with the company vision and purpose. How do you think this can be done? Because we have seen that many people, when we ask their purpose, many people don't know. It's like, I don't know, I don't know.
And that's one of the reasons we move away from the idea of focusing on purpose, because people who are practitioners of purpose that recommend the use of purpose, they'll always say a higher purpose, a higher purpose, a higher purpose. And when you do that, we all come, pretty much all of us come to one purpose. We want to help humanity, period, end of story. That's what we were born with, right? And so we all have the same purpose, right? At the highest level, our purpose is the same. But what we want to do in this world changes and is contextual. So what you want to create, the impact you want to make in the world, in the world, meaning in nature and in humanity, that impact is what we can visualize. That's what humanity is about. We can envision a future, see what it looks like, and then make it happen. That's the beauty of who we are. And so it's not about the purpose, because the purpose is the same. It really is about what is it that you want to do, and how then are we going to do it. So we talk about focusing on the impact and not what the purpose is, because we all have the same purpose.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Hi. So following up on that, it just made me think about how do you think work can help people find a way to improve their impact? Like if we contextualize it in their professional development, we understand that near self, that when people come to work, they come as their full self, right? Like a whole person.
Yes.
But in your experience, like in this shift from, focusing on purpose and instead of trying to define how you can impact, how do you think the work context helps people doing that?
I think it's actually a little bit of yin and yang, right? You've got, typically what you have is an organization that sets a goal for itself, which I understand that's not really the way you guys do it at Nearsoft, but most organizations do that.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we're doing. A founder decides that, the board decides that, whatever it is, and then you change from that. So as a employee, you follow that, you work to that. Really, the goal here is to have the employees define what impact they want for themselves and align that with the work that they're doing, so that the organization that they're working with encompasses a lot of that impact that you want to make. It's not just about the impact, though. The impact has a brother, and the brother is becoming. So as you said about holistic, the idea of impact is what actions am I making in the world? But in so doing, in making those actions, I'm also becoming someone that can make those actions. And I'm becoming someone that has the ability to make those actions. And that too is about human growth. So it's that work between finding the impact that matches the organizational impact, and you carve out a piece of that that suits for you, but also recognizing that that should be a stretch goal. And if it is truly a stretch goal, then you're becoming who you need to become in order to make that impact.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Thank you. Yeah.
Hello, Jose, and everyone.
Hi.
I have a question. You talk about meaning and how people can start looking into that. How is the best way to guide people to start asking themselves those questions? Those are difficult ones, and usually we are not told or taught how to think about the meaning I'm looking for, the meaning of my life, of my work, or the impact I'm doing. So what do you think is the best way to introduce people to that journey?
I think, thank you for the question, Iris. I think meaning is often looked at as this big thing, a big nut that we have to crack to figure out what's inside. In reality, humanity is designed to seek meaning in every second of our day. What we do, reaching for a glass of water, is meaning, right? Because our body said, I'm thirsty, I need a glass of water. There is meaning in that decision that our body made. Being aware of what feels right and what feels wrong, that's meaning. When we have a task that we're doing at work, as an example, or at home, and that task we're pushing ourselves to do, that's because we don't have meaning for that thing. And our conscious selves, our role is to actually put in front of us things that do have meaning and remove the things that don't. So it's not about finding meaning. It's there. It's about navigating those feelings about what is meaningful to us and using them to guide us. Again, as I said earlier, it's about a radical purpose. And the radical purpose is first finding meaning and belonging. So it's about finding the things that resonate. You know, sometimes we do something, we go, oh, wow, this feels so good, right? And we know what that means. So that's your system telling you, this is meaningful. This is what you want to be doing more of. This is what's going to get you excited. This is what you're going to excel at. And then there's the things where it's like, oh my God, I can't make myself do this. There's a reason, right? That reason is the thing that is in front of you at the moment isn't interesting enough and meaningful enough to you. And that's why we call it our guidance system. We're born with aptitudes. We're born with cravings. And the things that our cravings and our aptitudes link with are the things that we should be doing. And if we're doing different things, then we're going in a different direction. It's like following your GPS. It's telling you to turn right, but you're turning left because that's what somebody else told you to do, right? Your internal GPS is what radical purpose is.
Carlos, I think there's a question from our audience on Twitter. Let's get that in there.
Yeah, actually, yes. Thank you, Tulio. Yeah, Jose, we got a question on Twitter from someone that I care deeply about, someone who's watching, and that's my son. He's an architectural major. And, well, you might... Architectural major. He's studying to be an architect. And his question is, well, you might be contributing to a radical purpose life here. Here's a question. How did you manage to create a successful architectural drafting business at such a young age? 16.
Well, first of all, I was a freshman in high school when I took believe it or not, this was a long time ago before there was internet courses. So I took a course on, of course, was taking drafting in school, but I also took a right-away course. They would send you materials in the mail. You would do the work. You'd put it back in a tube. You ship it back, and so on and so forth. And you would do this. So after about a year of doing that, I was confident enough, don't ask me how, at the age of 16, to reach out to a bunch of local architects and engineers and start doing drafting of details. So I didn't bite off more than I could chew. All I wanted to do was their details. So they would send me hand sketches and examples of previous details that they had done in their work. And I would then create those new details that they had. These are small pieces of the large drawings that needed to be done for the buildings that they were doing. And I did that all through high school, worked for 3 or 4 architects throughout until I graduated and started a full-time architectural drafting job.
Thank you so much, Jose.
No, thank you. Carlos, what's your son's name?
Miguel.
Well, it sounds like Miguel is already doing a radical purpose life. So,
well, he's working on it.
Good to him.
Okay, thank you.
So, Jose, I want to shift this a little bit into practical ways that this can be put into place. So, what I'm hearing is it's important to create an environment or have an environment where people define what's meaningful on their own terms, where it's not somebody else telling you this is what's meaningful. It's something you connect to personally. It's part of what drives you, part of your GPS. And that's sometimes contradictory to how organizational structures are set up, right? I mean, because there's a focus, there's an area that needs to, a focus, there's a goal that needs to be reached. And I'll never forget when we first started putting this together, you and I, you talked about organization and how when you create an organization, it takes a life of its own, right? Then you have to sustain this living organism. whether you like it or not, sometimes it takes a life of its own, versus when you're purpose driven, you can be agile and move around. So what are the challenges for organizations that are today not very purpose driven, at least not in reality? They might have a purpose statement, but in reality, they're very organizational driven. How can they create an environment where people feel like they have meaning, they have belonging, they can make an impact? How do they make that shift?
Well, making that shift, I have no idea, because it in reality, you can't. I don't believe you can change an organization from thinking of itself as the organization to changing it where people are thinking about themselves as an organization. There's a difference there, right? There's a difference between the thing that has the rules, the thing that has the structures, the thing that has the mission and the vision and all of that stuff, to the people that own all of that, the shared group of people that own all of that. And you can't do one whilst inside the other, right? Now, something like Nearsoft, where you guys have already taken a lot of the leaps towards that, I think that's a more realistic way to look at what's happening. The reality is that when you start thinking from a radical purpose perspective, a lot of the structures and processes that are in place start to not make sense, right? So the place to start is to understand what are the barriers to being this collective group, right? And if you start to work as a collaborative, as a collective, then you actually start to see that this is in the way. This is an impediment. That's why our logo is that box and breaking out of that box. It's being able to see that there are things both in us, that beliefs that we've put up in ourselves that keep us in the box, but also things that have happened structurally in the organization that keep us from being ourselves. And it's that relationship between the two that we need to look at. It's not, there is no easy answer. It's about starting to understand each other and communicate and collaborate. And then from there, realize that we have to change organizational structures to support what we need.
Yeah, you know, in our case, that resonates a lot, I think, with us, because we have defined the role of people within the organization, I think, in a very, well, non-traditional way, because in the first place, like, we don't have anything like human resources. Like Paola, Iris, and myself, we are part of a team that we call ourselves people development. And this has a very, you know, deep reason, because of the way we conceive the role of people within the organization. This is, you know, people are not resources. In this whole new way of looking at organizations in general, you can see that people cannot be just a piece of the machine of or a tool or any sort of you know, resource that you can use to produce something. That people are the organization, right? So it makes total sense for us, and we can see how it just sometimes doesn't click with a lot of people when we talk about, like, we don't have human resources, like, we don't like that term because of that. So what do you think about that? Like, in the traditional way, how can people just get away from that notion? Like, you know, it's so ingrained in the way we do organizations.
Well, I think a lot of, first of all, thank you so much, because I absolutely agree with the not using that term. I despise that term personally. And I despise even more when people say it's not personal, it's only business, because in actuality, it's all personal, right? Everything is personal, and it also may be business. And so thank you for that. But I think the idea that you're trying to reach at, if I'm understanding your question correctly, is how do we start thinking not like that we are not a resource, right?
Yeah.
How do we stop thinking like we're employees, right? Employees comes from the idea of a tool, and that we're employing a tool. In this case, we're employing a human resource. So even the term employee contributes to that in our minds, right? We're tools. We're tools for someone else to use. And that someone is this organization that has more power than we do. And that change in our mind needs to change. And I think we're seeing it, and we're looking in many different places that we often don't find it. So we look at companies and we say, most people there, they don't think about it. And when people are coming to try to join freedom-centric organizations like your own, they're not sure what that means because they too are still stuck in their old paradigm. But we see it when we see freelance, right? The number of people that are working freelance, they understand what we're talking about. And the freelance space is growing dramatically, right? So what we're finding is that even though you go into a corporate environment and you don't get people that are beyond that language, beyond that mindset, people across the board are already in that mindset. It's just that they've chosen to leave organizations, traditional organizations, because they can't live in those environments anymore. So what we wanted to do is strike up a new type of conversation. It's not about being employed. It's about collaborating together to create new types of impacts, not to become a tool inside an organization.
Yeah, you're right. Totally.
Any other questions, Paula, Iris?
No, I was just thinking this makes a lot of sense to us because we are working to build this kind of organization, and we dream with it, and we talk about it every day, and it's hard. It's also hard to do this. And the question I have is, how can we as an organization build this environment for people? What do we need? What can we do? How can we start?
It starts with beliefs, right? You can't act from a place of not being. And if you are the beliefs you have, then that prevents you from doing the things you want to do, right? So it starts with taking people back and unlearning what they've learned all of their lives. You go to school so that you can be an employee. You're an employee so you can get a job. You get a job so you can get a salary, and that's why you work. That's wrong. That's not why we work. We work as human beings because we have a desire to make a change in the world. We all have a desire. What that desire is different and unique in each of us. But that's not why we work, right? We don't work to fill someone else's, hierarchical chart. That's not why we work. We work because we want to create something. We want to be something. And that's the difference in conversation. When someone comes in and says, I'm looking for a job, then the answer should be, we don't have jobs. What we have is the ability for you to grow and the ability for you to make an impact. If you want to do that, if you want to contribute to changing this world, then we're the organization for you to work with. But if you want to fill a job and get a salary, that's not the place for you. This is not the place for you. To me, that aspect of the change in conversation, it has to start there. Because if it starts somewhere else, we're already on the wrong path.
Jose, I mean, I think for a lot of people, the desire for that environment is changing. I equate it to an old imperialistic leadership model, command and control structure that's been around thousands of years. Call it patriarchy or matriarchy, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same thing, right? It's about controls. And the newer generations don't care for that. They really don't. And so even the older generation don't care for that, which is why a lot of employees, quote unquote, are disengaged, not happy. They do what they have to do to take care of their families because they have to, but they're not completely engaged. They're not 100% in. It just becomes a job. So what's it going to take for organizations to move away from this codependence model that's been around forever to an interdependent model? What do you think needs to happen? Do they all just need to read the Declaration of Interdependence? What's gonna finally make this shift happen? I think it's gonna have to happen no matter what, because the new generation really doesn't want to be in this model of command and control. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are you can't change from the top down. You need the support of the top, but really what you need is the people throughout the organization to demand. And you talk about the Declaration of Interdependence. It's this, right? We are interdependent on each other as individuals, not from an organizational perspective. And as such, we need to demand the freedom to explore what it is that we need. What is meaningful to us, right? How do we work with the people we want to work with? How do we create the things we want to create? How do we make the change we want to make? How do we grow to be the people we want to grow? So I've said that 3 or 4 times. I've said it again. It starts with the idea that we as individuals have all the power. We don't see it. We don't feel it. It doesn't act in us. We are following the leadership of organizations. We are following the leadership of schools. We're following the leadership of governments. We aren't standing up and making ourselves count. And it's not just one place. It's everywhere. We have to stand up and realize that it starts with us. It doesn't start with the organization, because the organization can only be what we want it to be. And if we wait for the organization to change itself, it's going to change itself to something else that, again, isn't who we want it to be. So if we wait for it, we wait for them, if you will, then we're waiting for them to make other decisions again, right? So it cannot be that we wait. It has to be that we explore ourselves and don't allow ourselves to get stuck in this rut, stuck in this direction of following someone else's decision making and not listening to our own GPS.
Iris, I think you had an additional question.
Yes, thank you. We are building right now a framework that helps people to work better as a team. But you know what a truly team means: trusting each other, building a vulnerability environment, and that kind of aspect that help people being themselves. And I hear you when you say it all starts with beliefs. What do we believe? What do we want to impact? How do you see a team starting that conversation?
It's going to really depend on the context. I mean, the fact that you guys are already doing that is a much easier conversation. A team that doesn't have that openness towards it is a much harder conversation, because you're really starting to open a door at a much earlier stage in what people already believe. You're breaking down huge barriers. If someone thinks that they're an employee, they don't see themselves as anything but. And changing that, I'm sure you guys see that all the time, right? With folks that come in. So I would encourage you to start the conversation as early, as low in the level of beliefs as possible. Because the lower you go, the easier the change is. Too often what we try to change is how people act. And when we change how people act, we're not changing the beliefs that support those actions, right? So how far back can we go so that what we're doing is actually talking to people about their ability to be agents in this world and talking to them about what that agency means, and not about what actions they can take. Because if you open up the door at the level of agency, at the level of empowerment, you've created a monster. And that monster will then start telling you what they demand and telling you what is necessary, which is what is necessary in an organization that is a collaborative effort, instead of an organization where a few are trying to figure things out, a few are trying to lead.
Well, Jose, it's great words of advice. We've had many movements in the past. Companies, people organize themselves to create unions. We've had civil rights movements. Sounds like a next movement is due, one with employee rights or human rights or human dignity at work, freedom at work is due. So those listening, if you're going to wait for the top down to make these changes, forget it. Just organize yourself, educate yourself, rally a few people around that effort, and change things from the inside out. So thanks for being with us. Thanks for joining us today, Annabelle, Paola, and Iris. And until next time, everyone, please stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you all.